At the beginning of this, maybe I was more skeptical. As the days have gone on, I'm not sure what I think anymore.
I felt that maybe it wouldn't affect me if I personally didn't believe in it.
So, knowing what you know now, would you still get cursed?
I'm seeking out a curse, a hex to put on myself.
A curse could end your life. You're literally begging the devil to knock on your door just to prove to you that God's real.
He could curse you with stupidity, but we think you got that down.
Despite the warnings, I'm investigating the real-world effects of dark magic.
Looks like you have a lot of love and a lot of opportunity. You are going to cause damage to that.
How do you feel after doing this?
Evil.
That must be quite seductive.
That's the power you're calling on. The devil, right? Quite seductive.
I'm going to enter into a pact with Satan.
Señor Satán, Lucifer, presentamos a este hermano. Con tu fuego purifica.
Wyong is pretty much the epicenter of all black magic. People are very scared to even talk about it.
Y'all better not call me at 2 o'clock in the morning talking about this man is dead. I don't want to hear that.
I have this physical feeling that something bad is coming. What have I done?
You're going to have to find faith in this in order to undo it.
Greetings, greetings, divine, all blessed, peace and love, joy and prosperity, honor and respect, honor and respect, honor and respect. It is another edition of Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo Secrets and Recipes, sponsored by, powered by NOIVD, New Orleans International Voodoo Day. We continue to invite you to join us, support us, donate, sponsor, participate in this very powerful spiritual medicine. The spiritual medicine of voodoo brings healing and relief from the shackles of slavery that bind the master and the slave to the same chain of social division. Inspired by National Voodoo Day in Benin and led by Black community members here locally in New Orleans, New Orleans International Voodoo Day is a day of collective remembrance and spiritual reparation that is preceded by a symposium and includes a procession to monuments at the sites of enslavement here in New Orleans, ritual to account for and seek abolition for the city's and the country's participation in the institution of slavery, homage to those ancestors who suffered through and survive the transatlantic slave trade, and honor and appreciation for the achievements of those who came out of oppression. 2 days for education, creative expression, elevation, cultural exchange, and above all, healing. Through authentic voodoo traditions handed down through generations, we offer a path to healing from the ongoing ramifications of slavery and racism in the United States and ultimately globally. And we continue to invite you from Cuba, from Brazil, from Puerto Rico, from Jamaica, from Trinidad and Tobago, and throughout the Pan-African diaspora where we find the practices and traditions of voodoo worldwide. We certainly invite you to come and join us first and foremost here in this shared sacred space on this platform to help us share, educate, re-educate about the truth of authentic voodoo and its history, but also to become a part of this powerful international event, inviting delegates from Benin, delegation from Haiti, delegation from throughout the African and indigenous Pan-African world to come to New Orleans for 2 days of education and celebration. I also want to acknowledge my co-host before I go into a little bit of today's show topic. Joshua Nylan Tanner, Wildman and First Priest of House of Divine Prince, Hoodoo Central LLC, Black Hawk Voodoo, my beloved Queen Mother, Sister Toni Martinez, Elder Reggie, our elder leader, financial advisor, spiritual advisor for NOIVD, New Orleans International Voodoo Day. And we will continue with this ongoing powerful conversation about the root of hoodoo, voodoo, certainly obia, conjure, and the like, and their beginnings in the maroon cultures, maroon societies of the Americas, for which we owe a great deal of our liberation, our freedom, our sense of fight for freedom. And we want to particularly highlight tonight the legend of John St. Milo. If we're speaking Spanish, we might say Juan St. Milo. June 19th, which we now commemorate as Juneteenth. June 19th was a day of remembrance in Louisiana, specifically in the community of St. Bernard Parish, amongst a century before Juneteenth. It was a day where people celebrated the life of Juan St. Milo and what he came to symbolize: freedom and resistance. In the late 18th century in Spanish Louisiana, Juan St. Milo and his group of Maroons roamed the marshes surrounding New Orleans. The word maroon derives from the Spanish word cimarron, which roughly translates to fugitive or runaway. San Milo was one of Louisiana's fierce and most notable Maroons. Little is known about his upbringing. Prior to mutiny, he belonged to a Swiss-born colonial official with a plantation along the German coast, a region along the Mississippi River just above New Orleans. After Milo's escape, he utilized his carpentry skills to produce furniture to accumulate weapons and gunpowder. His alarming success gained him loyal supporters throughout the Maroon community. He established his main camp in Bas-du-Fleuve, located in modern-day Saint Bernard Parish, along the banks of Lake Bourne. Bas-du-Fleuve and surrounding regions were notorious for maroonage and maroon encampments. The majority of Maroons from the area hailed from St. Bernard Parish, considering its geographical features and proximity to New Orleans paved the way for large plantations. The first ships carrying enslaved Africans arrived in New Orleans in 1719, and by as early as 1723, maps depict large plantations fronting the Mississippi River within the modern-day borders of St. Bernard Parish. The majority of the earliest slave ships that arrived in French Louisiana were Senegambian, modern-day Senegal and Gambia. The Senegambians were also the sort of the seed ethnic group for which the telling of Alex Haley's roots was said to be rooted in. The Senegambians were from a sophisticated cultural skilled at ironworking, farming, and various other tasks. They successfully cultivated indigo, which grew wild in both Senegal and Louisiana. It became a lucrative cash crop in early Louisiana. Some Africans fled from brutal slave conditions to the swampy environment surrounding the plantations that provided an elusive escape. Bas-du-Fleur, a similar place and similar places provided St. Milo and other Maroons a plentiful source of runaways. Maroons living in Bas du Fleur started out as raiders plundering to survive. However, their modus operandi shifted as they became more organized under St. Milo's leadership. And again, they were raiders. Plundering who? Plundering what? To survive. And why have we not heard of these stories? Why is this kept so hush-hush until today? However, their modus operandi shifted as they became more organized under St. Milo's leadership. And according to Gwendolyn Midlow Hall, in a work called Africans in Colonial Louisiana, the development of Afro-Creole culture in the 18th century, and I quote, although some of the Maroons continued to raid plantations and kill cattle, there was a move towards production and trade for economic survival. They cultivated corn, squash, and rice, and gathered and ground herbs for food. They made baskets and sifters and other articles woven from willow and reeds. They carved indigo vats and trolls from cypress wood, and they gathered berries, dwarf palmetto roots, and sassafras, trapped birds, hunted and fished, and went to New Orleans to trade and to gamble. Sounds to me like they had what science describes as civilization, a culture, a society separate from enslavement. And although the Maroons were denounced as brigands and murderers and vagabonds, their violence was almost entirely defensive. The danger they posed to the colony was more profound. They surrounded the plantations. Slaves remaining with their masters were in constant contact with Maroons. Stories of them reverberated throughout Spanish Louisiana and terrified the Creole elite and wealthy slave owners. St. Milo was known for his harsh tactics at remaining a free person. Although St. Milo and his group were typically defensive, they sometimes attacked people transporting enslaved persons to emancipate others and enlarge their coalition. And according to other legend, he stabbed the tree near his encampment and claimed, Malheur au blanc qui passerait ces bonheurs. Woe to the white man who would pass this boundary. He also kept dangerous company. One of his loyal lieutenants was nicknamed Knight of the Axe because of his choice of weapon used to brutally split open the heads of an American captor who made the unfortunate mistake of venturing his way. Original head splitters, if you will. The Spanish colonial government repeatedly ordered unsuccessful raids to capture the fugitive Maroon St. Milo. He and his Maroons, usually comprising over 100 armed men, would rather die than succumb to brutality of slavery. The Spanish elite considered the Maroon a threat that needed to be immediately eradicated. In 1784, they mounted a surprise invasion consisting of regular troops, militiamen, hunters, and others who desired St. Milo dead. And guided by a tip from St. Milo's captured companions, they plunged into the marshes with pirgos, flat-bottomed boats commonly used to navigate shallow waters, full of heavily armed men. They attacked the camp and captured St. Milo with 16 other men. 16 is a very important number in Ifa divination. St. Milo was paraded around New Orleans as white citizens jeered and hurled insults. The Maroons faced endless flogging, brandings of the letter M for maroon. Others suggested they were branded also with the fleur de lis, our symbolic French symbol for the city of New Orleans. They were shackling and other forms of torture. And during this trial, he confessed to murdering white captors. On June 19th, 1784, New Orleanians of various social classes poured into Plaza des Armas, today Jackson Square, in the French Quarter to see what at the time was considered a grand spectacle, the lynching of St. Milo. And for those of you who aren't quite clear, Jackson Square, that's your favorite tourist spot where all your friendly tarot card readers are set up and stationed. You might see some kids, beating the drum, beating on the bottom of buckets, street performers. And no clergy administered their final confessions in this great Catholic city. An atypical act for even the harshest of criminals. Instead, they opted to watch from their balcony overlooking the plaza. Some say they were beheaded and placed on posts in Jackson Square. St. Milo unsuccessfully attempted to exonerate his two companions from the gallows. The floor of the gallows soon gave way and 3 bodies dangled. St. Milo's ability to stand up to brute oppression was recognized among local Black community, both enslaved and the gens de couleur libre, the free people of color, and throughout the South. He continued to live as a legend throughout the region for well over a century following his death, and ultimately became an ascended ancestor. In Yoruba, we might say Egungun, but indeed a Loa or deity or a Orisha of great notable importance to Louisiana voodoo. His gallantry was the subject of a popular Creole song in St. Bernard Parish, The Dirge of St. Milo, and is documented in George Washington's Cable's 1886 work, Creole Slave Songs. George Washington Cable's 1886 work, Creole Slave Songs. And I quote, "They asked him who his comrades were. Poor St. Milo said not a word. The judge his sentence read to him, and then they raised the gallows tree. They drew the horse, the cart moved off and left St. Milo hanging there. The sun was up an hour high when on the levee he was hung. They left his body swinging there for carrion crows to feed upon, the dirge of St. Milo." And according to Lawrence Powell in The Accidental City, the song portrayed the maroon chieftain as biting his tongue when asked to implicate his comrades, which could still be heard in St. Bernard Parish long after emancipation. It was not just a song of lament, but a testament to the slaves' defiance. His legacy helped inspire the German Coast Uprising along the Mississippi River in 1811, the largest slave insurrection in the United States history. St. Milo did more than inspire hope for a life of freedom for the enslaved. Sometime between the 1820s and 1830s, a Spanish ship leaving the Spanish East Indies, present-day Philippines, docked at New Orleans. A group of Filipinos seized the opportunity to abandon ship. These Filipinos, skilled and adept at life on the water, sought refuge on the shores of Lake Bourne in modern-day St. Bernard Parish. away from the hustle and bustle of the largest ports in the Americas. They named their newfound settlement St. Milo after hearing stories of the legend. It was the first Filipino settlement in the United States. When Juneteenth celebrations made its way to Louisiana via its neighbor, Texas, many were already recognizing June 19th. St. Milo is not mentioned in any textbooks and hardly mentioned in history books. There are no statues in his honor or street names named after him. There is a street named after Governor Esteban Rodriguez Miro, who launched the raid and oversaw the lynching of St. Milo. And despite this, his martyrdom reverberates throughout Louisiana, typically in song and oral history, and his saga of resistance will never be forgotten. What say you, Elder Reggie?
Blessings, Divine. A blessing, Sister Toni. Blessing, Joshua. Blessing, collective audience. I was listening. I know a little bit on St. Milo. Everything you hit on was on point, and I'm proud to be associated with a great warrior like that from the city of New Orleans.
Yes, yes. As you were telling that tale, I grew up going in the swamps in a pea root boat that glide across the water with the big long stick, because in the marsh, you might have a deep spot and then you might have a really low spot that you could get out and drag the pea root across. And in my head, while I'm listening to you, I'm going back to my childhood and seeing all this swamp area and knowing what kind of atmosphere and lifestyle that they had as Maroons in the swamps in St. Bernard area. And as a kid, I thought it was wonderful, great, adventurous. Not thinking about it as an adult, to me, it was like it would be so scary to me right now at this age. And to think of those brave Maroons that lived that life, that went in and out of there under cover of darkness on the water, slipping in and out, and the slaves on the plantation that would help them. They couldn't escape themselves, but they helped those who did escape by giving them seed and weapons every now and then and different things to help them. Boy, that was a time to be alive. It was a very interesting time.
Yeah, yeah. How you guys doing today, man? I hope you guys are doing well. Yeah, Maroons. That's a loaded thing. I would say, I was listening to Sitaz and what he was saying earlier about the culture and about the fishing, the way of living, the way of surviving, the way of resisting. All of that was, I couldn't help but to think about all the wars that America had with the indigenous people here during those times. That people don't really talk about, that we don't really even address much about. But this country's been at war with itself more than it's been at war with anybody else or anybody else outside of this country. We have to remember that, and we also have to remember that I would say that Maroonist culture was given fuel by the cultures that was here, that was resisting the colonial colonization of this land, along with the enslaving of those people too.
And it's funny when you say this country has been at war with itself longer than any other war they fought. This country This country has been at war with everybody and itself and anybody longer than any country ever. If they're not fighting themselves here, the citizens here, they fighting other people from other countries. It was constant war here.
You're right. Right on.
Right.
And I would say that in terms of like our narrative, in terms of runage, is very like I'm thinking about that in context now, and I'm just like, runage and that name, just like how through time we've been renamed, or people of color has been renamed from black to Negro to colored to whatever. In that time and in that day, those people that was outside of society or was living within their own system and of living and giving to them, to life and to the things that they was doing and to the resistance of freedom and being free in the face of oppression. They gave them a name, Maroon.
And we understand the word maroon was used throughout the Americas, probably used more often, well, certainly
Speaking of
documented in Jamaica and Brazil and South America. Maroon was common in the Americas. Come on in, Elder Reggie. Elder Reggie, you have a delay.
Yes. Speaking of Maroons, St. Malo is roughly 110 years later would be what we now call Juneteenth, June 19, 1865. First celebrated June 19, 1866. But I ran across an interesting read today, and it kind of put me in remembrance of St. Malo, because it said consuming red foods and drinks is central to Juneteenth celebration, and for some African American represents a cultural connection to their West African heritage. The color red meant power and sacrifice in the cultural practice of West Africa affected by the Atlantic slave trade, particularly the Yorubas and in the Congo, who brought their beliefs and traditions with them to their enslaved communities in America. For some celebrants, red picnic items such as barbecue meats, cherry cobbler, and red strawberry soda standing in for traditional drinks of hibiscus and cola nut tea symbolize the bloodshed of enslaved.
You're kind of breaking up, Reggie.
Enslavement in honor to and when I
that's very interesting.
You know, I just thought that was interesting. Yeah, it was an interesting read because it symbolizes the bloodshed. St. Malo blood died. Even though it was not a myth, the people found a way to still celebrate it throughout this southern region. Yeah. And we had to be cloak and dagger with a system of oppression. We had to hide some of the things that we was doing. And so we had to use some of the items right in our presence to mean other things versus what it meant to the colonializers.
Yes, yes. That's how we have the Catholic saints all mixed up in voodoo and stuff as a way of hiding it. The masters thought we were actually praying to Saint Joseph, so they didn't have a problem with that. They didn't have a problem with that.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, it was like I was reading about Saint John Eve, how Marie Laveau tricked the city of New Orleans into allowing her to have the ceremony on Bayou St. John in a time when no one could gather, no blacks could gather at all, because white New Orleans was still afraid from the Haitian Revolution. So they had a band that blacks could not gather at all.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 blacks
Yeah, and
was a
speaking
gathering.
go ahead.
Go ahead, Elder Reggie.
Yeah, speaking of St. John's Eve, speaking of St. John's Eve, I believe it's Monday. There's going to be a voodoo head washing and cleansing hosted by La Source. Anyone in the listening audience that would like to come out could come out and offer a head cleansing in honor of the works that Marie Laveau done and others in this region this Monday night. Well, with that being said, to pass our time, go ahead, ask the question.
Elder Reggie, you're breaking up really bad. Please let somebody else take the microphone right now.
Okay, so I'm breaking up. Yeah.
Well, what Mr. Reggie was saying is that there's a ceremony on St. John's Bayou on Monday, June 23rd. If I'm not mistaken, I think it starts around 6 o'clock. That will be put on by La Source and Mamba Sally-Ann. Some of us will be out there. Most of us will be out there celebrating Marie Laveau in that ceremony that she did, and continue doing healings and head washes. Excuse me. That's what we'll be doing out there, and also doing a ceremony out there. So come and join, come and see, come and witness, come be a part of it. We'd love to have anyone. Everyone is invited.
And with that, we'll close tonight, reminding everyone of International Voodoo Day 2026, the 3rd annual. Try to make your vacation plans so that you can join us and also see this wonderful city and see the areas that we're speaking of in a lot of our podcasts. I want to wish everyone a good night, and we'll see you tomorrow at the same time. Good night, everyone.
Sure.